Welcome to Tech to Tech presented by Kaizen, where we will explore common cleaning questions and answers. This session has been pre-recorded and will include additional FAQs related to this specific topic at the end of the presentation. We hope it is 15 minutes well spent. Let's get started. I would like to introduce Kaizen's own Eric Bromley.
Thank you, William, and welcome everyone to this edition of Kaizen's Tech to Tech series. Today, we're going to be talking about summertime corrosion, specifically with steel. With the summer heat comes humidity, and I know that the word corrosion is kind of a general term, but typically corrosion means that a surface is material has been taken away, and with rust is really what we're going to call it today. That typically indicates that a material has been added to the surface. Not always, but just generally speaking. So we'll refer to it as rust for this presentation. Some of the topics that we'll be covering today is how does rust happen? Why mostly in the summer, even though it is prevalent all year round, but it does get worse in the summer. How can I minimize rust and how can I eliminate rust? Two very important questions that are can be difficult to answer. First off, how does rust occur? Well, it occurs mostly with aqueous processes, but not all the time. If you're cleaning in a solvent application or vacuum vapor degreasing or semi-aqueous immersion process, it really can happen once the parts are removed from the cycle, from the process rather, the dry cycle, and they're left exposed to the environment. That's really when rust happens. The Another area is the process fluid temperature. Is if the rinse tank temperature is very high, then as the parts come out, they dry very quickly and they can attract moisture in the room, and that can cause rusting as well. We'll touch on that a little bit further into the presentation. In addition, the clean parts exposed to the environment, just meaning that when the parts do come out and they're all clean and they're sitting on a cool down bench or they're waiting for the next process. Excuse me, if they're not protected, then moisture and humidity can settle on them and they can begin to rust. The cleaning process location, what I mean by that is where the cleaning process or the drying section, where it is located on the production floor. If it's near a spray application or open doors or things of that nature, it can be exposed to moisture. The performance of the dryers can also play a big part in how rust happens. If the drying section is not adequate, if the dryers are not aligned correctly, or that the temperature in the blowers is not sufficient, or if the parts don't have long enough time to dwell in the dry section, it can result in some puddling and some areas that may not get direct contact where the moisture will stay, and rust occurs there as well. And as I'd said, rust will perform wherever water is remaining on the surface. That's a pretty straightforward statement, but it's sometimes can be deceiving. Rust can form also on inside of corners, blind holes, fine pitch threads, any 90 degrees, any difficult areas for water to get out of through a dry cycle. The left in there, it can rust. Areas of contact with similar materials, meaning if you had a basket of parts and you had run them through the entire process and let them in the basket, the areas where they're touching the corners and the tips, those can sometimes collect a little droplets of water, and that will cause some heat. That'll cause some rusting, rather. The latent heat of the material, what I was referring to here, is a lot like back to the high temperature of the rinse water. If the part itself is extremely hot when it comes out, as it sits, it'll attract moisture and humidity in the air, and as the moisture and humidity settle on the part, it quickly flashes off, and it'll cause droplets, little spots, and little areas on the flat surfaces that you'll see. If the parts are in storage too long, that can cause rusting. It may not seem like a long time. Sometimes you put it into a traveler and it's waiting for the next process, or it moves to a different part in the production floor. If it's there too long and it's not protected, then it can start to rust. Why mostly in the summer? Well, the higher relative humidity is the biggest cause. Uh, in some parts of the globe, it's the humidity is high all the time, so it's not so much of a concern. But here in North America, the humidity cycles are typically 1 or 2 months out of the year where it's extremely bad. and those where usually where you see the rust increase, the rust happening. And with this relative higher humidity, you would see the doors open in the larger shops, and the fans are there pushing the air around, and just to try to make it a little more comfortable for the operators. And in doing that, you're actually pushing moist air throughout the facility, and again, it can settle onto these parts. If the cleaning process is located near an etching or a acid dip line, many times there's bubble tanks there, or there's acid agitation tanks. There's moisture and humidity that comes off of those. And combine that with the open doors and fans moving it around, that moisture migrates through the facility and will settle on the parts. And rust can develop immediately, what's referred to as flash rusting, or over time, where the parts can sit, and as they cool, the rust will start to show. One thing is, if you're seeing on your parts, if you're seeing spotty or partial rusting, then that's not always an indication that it's a rust issue. It's an indication that your cleaning chemistry is not working well. If there's oil and coolant remaining on the parts, those areas are essentially being protected from the moisture because they still have a coating on them. So if you're seeing inconsistent surface rust, not unlike this picture, areas in the corners, or just kind of not anything, no comparison from one part to another, and in the corners and things of that nature, that's an indication that there's still some oil and coolant left on the parts. So you should check your chemistry. It doesn't appear as though it'd be working very well. So how can I minimize rust? Well, the simplest answer is to completely dry and protect your parts. That's uh, that's the simplest answer, but it's not always the easiest. Try to process your parts in a humidity controlled environment. There are many applications that require this. Aerospace and medical are two of the largest ones, where they do have to keep their humidity controlled very closely in the environment where they're building parts, but not everyone has that ability or that capability. Don't handle the parts with your bare hands. Use gloves. You'd be surprised how much the acid and the oils on your fingers can create surface spots. And in some cases, you can actually see a real fingerprint on the part from where you've touched it. And it happens very quickly. Don't allow the cleaning parts to touch each other. And this would be more for larger sheet stock, stacked materials, or machine surfaces. If you let them touch together, especially while they're coming out and cooling, the area in between those places can cause rusting. And as I mentioned before, be mindful of nearby aqueous processes. They're going to be adding moisture and humidity into the air, and it's going to be settling in the surrounding area. And if you're cleaning parts, or you have cleaned parts stored next to this area that are not protected, then that's going to be a source for rusting. How can I eliminate rust? Well, it's very difficult to completely eliminate rust, especially in the summertime, for the reasons that I had mentioned. The best solution that we have found is to use a cleaning chemistry with an RP that's built into the chemistry itself. So as you're washing, it's also protecting the parts with a very thin, dry film layer of RP that is applied to the parts. And RP means rust preventative. You could also add an RP into the final rinse stage, and this is added into the rinse water itself at low concentrations, typically 2, 3, 4% concentration by volume. And as the parts come out, the water will dry off, but the dry film RP will remain on the parts. And it's an excellent method for eliminating rust. For long-term storage of parts, it's a good idea to have a standalone RP tank where the parts are actually dipped into the RP itself. They're typically water displacing, where any water that is in the part will be removed by the RP. You leave the parts in, they come out, you let them drip off any excess material back into the tank, and then you can store them. Those are typically a wet film RP. The protection is a lot longer and better, but it does give a wet film. Or you could use VCI bags, oil or wax paper. This is very helpful for stacked parts. If you have sheet material or parts that are touching themselves on a long axis, You put something like this in between them so that there's not metal to metal touching, and it makes a big difference. It'll help on any kind of rusting, especially for longer term storage. So in conclusion, when it comes to manufacturing, summer heat is not always good. As the areas that I touched on previously here, the humidity can play a big part in this rusting. Be mindful of the areas around the cleaning process. That would be near the open doors or any aqueous process that could be adding moisture into the air and it's going to be settling on your parts. Part handling and storage. Use gloves. Make sure the parts aren't touching each other. Use VCI bags. Long-term storage, you may want to consider adding an RP, and using a cleaning chemistry with an added RP is also a great idea. It's the easiest solution. It's consistent, and it's it's very effective. And finally, optimize your dryer temperature for the both the temperature and the efficiency to make sure that they are working to their optimal performance. You don't want a temperature that is too hot where it flash dries the parts. You just want to blow off any excess moisture and allow them to be dried, and make sure they are aimed in the right directions and set for the best performance. So there are some frequently asked questions that we get a lot, and I put down four of them here that are the most common. For added rust protection, you suggest adding an RP into the rinse stage of the aqueous process. How does this work? Well, as I mentioned, you put a small concentration of the RP directly into the rinse tank, typically 3, 4, 5% concentration. And then as the parts come out, the water flashes off and a very thin dry film layer of RP protection remains. Once the RP is added onto the parts, will it affect further processes? Most times it does not, because the layer is so thin that it will not affect downstream assembly or further processing issues. We actually have some customers that are using our RP and they can paint right over it without any problem at all. If you do need to remove the RP for further machining, it can be done easily in a clean rinse bath, heated rinse bath. You just put the parts in one more time, and the RP will rinse off, and then the parts are available for further assembly. Can I apply an RP when I'm cleaning dissimilar metals? Yes, you can. The RP will coat on all of the dissimilar metals. It just won't have an RP effect on parts that don't rust, but you can do it and it will not discolor or darken any parts or cause any issues along that line. And finally, is there any easy method to remove the rust once it appears on the surface? That really depends on the severity of the rust as well as the part configuration. But typically, an acid bath, a low pH acid bath, will remove rust on the parts. You may need a tumbling or maybe even a media blast to remove the rusting. If they're larger parts or if they're machine surfaces, then it may require a manual process to wipe it off or abrade it back off to get the parts clean again, free of rust rather. So that concludes my tech to tech session. Once again, thank you very much for your time, and I will turn it back over to William.
Thanks, Eric. Thank you all for watching this Tech to Tech session. If you'd like to discuss this topic further or have any questions not answered in the session, please contact your local Kaizen regional manager or send an email to tech at kaizen.com, and we will have someone follow up with you as soon as possible. Do you want to have exclusive access to future content sent directly to your inbox, or do you know someone who would benefit from these sessions? The answer is yes. Just go to tech by kaizen.com and fill out the subscription form. And if you like this video, be sure to follow us on our social media platforms for more expert cleaning content.